The morning sun cast long golden rays through the kitchen window of the modest suburban home on Maple Street. 8-year-old Eli sat at the small wooden table, his legs swinging beneath him as he watched his father, Michael, move around the kitchen with practiced ease. The familiar routine had become their special time together, just the two of them before the world demanded their attention. Michael poured milk over Eli's cereal, the sound echoing softly in the quiet kitchen. "Don't forget, buddy, Mrs. Henderson is picking you up after school today," he said, ruffling his son's already messy brown hair. "I might be running late from work." Eli looked up with bright eyes, milk dripping from his spoon. "Can we play catch when you get home, Dad? You promised we'd practice my curveball." Michael smiled, that warm, protective smile that had become Eli's anchor in their small world. "Of course, kiddo. We'll practice until your arm falls off." He chuckled at his own joke, and Eli giggled in response, the sound filling the kitchen with pure joy. The father moved to the counter, preparing his coffee with methodical precision. Everything about Michael seemed deliberate, controlled, from the way he arranged the morning newspaper to how he checked his watch. But there was a tenderness in his movements when he looked at his son, a softness that contradicted his otherwise alert demeanor. "Dad, why do you always check the street when you drink your coffee?" Eli asked, noticing how his father's eyes drifted to the window between sips. Michael paused, cup halfway to his lips. "Just making sure everything's okay, buddy. It's what dads do." He forced another smile, but this one didn't quite reach his eyes. "Finish your cereal, or you'll be late for school." Outside, unbeknownst to the father and son sharing their morning ritual, a black SUV had quietly pulled up across the street. The vehicle's tinted windows concealed its occupants, but inside, Agent Cole sat rigid in the passenger seat, his jaw clenched as he stared at the house. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his earpiece. "Team Alpha, we have visual confirmation," he whispered into his radio. "Target is inside with the child." The voice that crackled back was cold and efficient. "Copy that. You know the drill, Cole. This has to look authentic." Agent Cole closed his eyes briefly, taking a deep breath. When he opened them, his face had hardened into a mask of professional resolve. "Roger that. Moving in 60 seconds. Back inside the kitchen, Michael suddenly stiffened. His coffee cup froze midway to his lips, and his eyes darted to the window. The street, which had been empty moments before, now felt different, wrong. His training kicked in instantly, years of conditioning that had saved his life more times than he could count. "Eli," he said quietly, his voice taking on a tone his son had never heard before, "I need you to go to your room and stay there until I tell you it's safe to come out." Eli looked up, confused. "But Dad, I haven't finished my—" "Now, Eli, please." Michael's voice was firm but not harsh. There was an urgency there that made the 8-year-old's stomach tighten with fear. Before Eli could respond, the front door exploded inward with a thunderous crash. The wooden frame splintered as armed FBI agents in full tactical gear swarmed through the entrance like a black tide. Their shouts filled the air. "FBI, get down! Hands where we can see them!" Eli screamed, his small voice piercing through the chaos. His cereal bowl clattered to the floor, milk and cornflakes spreading across the linoleum. Michael's protective instincts took over immediately. He lunged forward, wrapping his arms around his son, shielding him with his own body as the agents surrounded them. "It's okay, buddy," Michael whispered into Eli's ear, his voice remarkably calm despite the chaos erupting around them. "Just stay with me. Don't look at them. Look at me." But Eli couldn't stop looking. His young eyes were wide with terror as he watched men in black uniforms point weapons at his father. The man who had taught him to ride a bike, who read him bedtime stories, who had never raised his voice in anger. The world had suddenly become a nightmare, and he couldn't understand why. "Michael Harrison, you're under arrest," Agent Cole's voice boomed through the kitchen, but there was something in his tone, a slight tremor that betrayed his inner turmoil. "Get down on the ground now." Michael slowly stood, his hands raised, making sure to keep his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "Eli, close your eyes, okay? This is just a game. A really loud, scary game, but it's not real." But it felt real to Eli. It felt like his world was ending. Two agents roughly grabbed Michael's arms, forcing him to the ground. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut echoed through the kitchen like a death knell. Eli watched in horror as his father, his hero, was pressed face first against the cold linoleum floor where they had shared countless meals together. "Dad!" Eli's voice cracked as he tried to reach for his father, but one of the agents gently but firmly held him back. "Don't hurt him," Michael said, his voice muffled against the floor. "Please, he's just a child. He doesn't understand." Agent Cole stood over the scene, his weapon drawn but pointed at the ground. His face was a mask of professional composure, but his eyes told a different story. They were filled with something that looked dangerously close to anguish. As the other agents hauled Michael to his feet, Eli broke free from the agent holding him and ran to his father. His small arms wrapped around Michael's legs, clinging desperately as tears streamed down his face. "Please don't take my dad. Please, he didn't do anything wrong." Michael looked down at his son, his own eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I love you, Eli. I love you so much. Remember that, okay? No matter what happens, remember that your dad loves you." The agents began to lead Michael toward the door, but he stopped and turned back to look at his son one last time. In that moment, their eyes met across the destroyed kitchen. Father and son, protector and protected, saying goodbye in a way that neither fully understood. It was then that Agent Cole stepped forward, his weapon holstered. He knelt down beside Eli, his large frame dwarfing the small boy. His voice was barely above a whisper, meant only for the child's ears. But Michael heard every word. "I'm sorry," Agent Cole said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm so sorry, kid. I'm so damn sorry." The words hung in the air like a confession, like a prayer, like a plea for forgiveness that might never come. Michael's eyes widened slightly, not with fear, but with understanding. He gave Cole an almost imperceptible nod, then allowed himself to be led away. As the front door closed behind them, Eli was left alone in the kitchen, surrounded by the debris of his shattered world. The morning sun still streamed through the window, but the warmth had gone out of it. Everything looked the same, but nothing would ever be the same again. The black SUV pulled away from the curb, leaving behind only the echo of Eli's sobs and the memory of a father's love. Hours later, in a sterile interrogation room downtown, Agent Cole slammed the door behind him with such force that the sound reverberated through the concrete walls. The room was windowless, lit by harsh fluorescent lights that cast everything in a sickly, pale glow. Michael sat at a metal table, his hands still cuffed behind his back, his face calm despite everything that had just transpired. "You didn't tell me there'd be a kid." Cole's voice exploded through the small space, his professional composure finally cracking. He began pacing back and forth, his hands running through his hair in frustration. 8 years old, Michael." 8! Michael looked up at him with weary eyes. "That was the only way it would look real, James. You know that." The use of his first name seemed to deflate some of Cole's anger. He slumped into the chair across from Michael, his head in his hands. "There had to be another way. There had to be." "No," Michael said quietly. "There wasn't. Kozlov's people have been watching me for months. They know about Eli. If this arrest hadn't looked completely authentic, they would have known it was staged. And then—" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. "Agent Cole," James looked up, his eyes red with exhaustion and something deeper. "So this is it? This is how it ends?" Michael nodded slowly. "My cover's blown. Has been for weeks. The moment they started asking questions about the Zagreb operation, I knew it was over. I needed to make sure Eli was safe first." "The Zagreb operation was 18 months ago," James said. "How long have you known?" "Long enough." Michael's voice was steady, but there was a weight to it that spoke of sleepless nights and impossible decisions. "Long enough to know that I could never go home. Not really. Not without putting him in danger." James leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. 15 years, Michael. 15 years you've been under. You've given everything to this job. Your marriage, your identity, your life. Doesn't that count for anything?" "It counts for keeping my son alive," Michael replied. "That's all that matters now." The room fell silent except for the hum of the fluorescent lights. Both men sat with their own thoughts, their own guilt, their own understanding of what had to happen next. "What happens to Eli?" James asked finally. "He goes to his aunt in Colorado. Sarah will take care of him. She's good people. She'll make sure he grows up safe, normal, away from all of this." Michael's voice caught slightly on the last words, but he pressed on. "There's a fund set up for his education. College, everything. He'll be taken care of." "And you?" Michael met his eyes. "I'd disappear. New identity, new life. Somewhere far away where Kozlov's people can't find me, where I can't accidentally lead them back to Eli." James nodded slowly. "The official story is that you were part of a terrorist cell, conspiracy to commit acts of violence against federal installations. The evidence is airtight. You'll get 25 to life." "Good," Michael said. "Let them think I'm in maximum security somewhere. Let them waste their resources trying to find me in the system." "I hate this," James said suddenly. "I hate every damn part of this." "I know." Michael's voice was soft, understanding. "But it's the only way to protect him. In 10 years, 15 years, when he's old enough to understand, maybe then someone can tell him the truth." James reached into his pocket and pulled out a small digital recorder. "You want to leave him something? A message? I can make sure he gets it when he's older." Michael considered this for a long moment. "Number, if I record something now, I'll just be a voice to him. A ghost. Better that he remembers me as his father, not as this." He gestured to the room around them. "Besides, I have something else in mind." That evening, in a safe house across town, Michael sat at a small wooden desk with a pen and paper. The room was sparse, temporary, a place where identities came to die before new ones could be born. But for these few hours, it was his sanctuary, his last chance to be a father. He wrote slowly, carefully, choosing each word with the precision of a man who knew this would be his final gift to his son. The letter was both an explanation and an apology, a love letter and a goodbye. He told Eli about the job he could never discuss, about the dangers that had followed him home, about the impossible choice he had been forced to make. When he finished, he folded the letter carefully and placed it in an envelope along with his dog tags, the ones he had worn through 3 tours of duty before he had ever become a father. He added a photograph, Eli at the park, laughing as Michael pushed him on the swings. It had been taken just 2 weeks ago, but it felt like a lifetime. He sealed the envelope and wrote on the outside, "For Eli, when he's old enough to understand." The next morning, Michael Harrison ceased to exist. The man who had loved his son more than life itself vanished into the shadows, leaving behind only the memory of a father's sacrifice and the promise of a child's future. Years passed. Eli grew up in Colorado with his Aunt Sarah, a woman who loved him fiercely, but could never quite fill the void left by his father's absence. She told him what she had been told, that his father had made terrible choices, that he was in prison, that it was best to try to forget and move on. But Eli never forgot. He carried the memory of that morning like a wound that wouldn't heal. He remembered his father's calm voice, his protective embrace, the way he had looked at him with such love, even as he was being taken away. And he remembered Agent Cole's words, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." By the time Eli turned 16, he had already decided what he wanted to do with his life. If his father had been capable of terrible things, then maybe he could be capable of good things. Maybe he could find a way to balance the scales. The military academy was his idea. Sarah had been reluctant at first, but she saw something in Eli's eyes, a determination that reminded her painfully of his father. So she signed the papers and watched as her nephew transformed himself into a young man with purpose. It was during his senior year at the academy that Agent Cole, now retired and gray-haired, finally came to see him. Eli was 18 now, tall and strong, with his father's eyes and his father's quiet intensity. When Cole handed him the sealed envelope, Eli's hands trembled slightly. "Your father asked me to give this to you when you were old enough to understand," Cole said quietly. I think you're old enough now." Eli took the envelope to his dormitory room and sat on his narrow bed, staring at his father's handwriting. When he finally opened it, his hands were steady, but his heart was racing. The letter began simply, "My dearest Eli, if you're reading this, then you're old enough to know the truth about who your father really was and why he had to leave you." As Eli read, the story unfolded like a revelation. His father hadn't been a terrorist. He had been a deep-cover operative, working to infiltrate and dismantle criminal organizations that threatened innocent people. The arrest had been staged to protect Eli from the dangerous men who had discovered his father's true identity. "I left so you could live," the letter continued. "I let them take me so they couldn't take you. Every day that I was away from you was a day that you were safe, and that was worth any sacrifice." Eli's eyes filled with tears, not the helpless tears of a frightened child, but the tears of a young man finally understanding the depth of his father's love. The dog tags felt heavy in his hands, weighted with honor and sacrifice. The letter ended with words that would stay with Eli for the rest of his life. "I know you'll make choices that will make me proud. I know you'll find your own way to serve, to protect, to love. And I know that wherever this life takes you, you'll carry the best parts of me with you. I love you, son. I have always loved you, and I always will. Eli folded the letter carefully and placed it in his footlocker, along with the dog tags and the photograph. When he looked in the mirror, he saw his father's eyes looking back at him, not the eyes of a criminal, but the eyes of a protector, a guardian, a man who had given everything to keep his son safe. The next morning, Eli walked across the academy grounds with his head held high. He had finally found his father again, not in the memories of that terrible morning, but in the truth of who Michael Harrison had really been. A hero, a father, a man who had loved his son enough to disappear so that his son could live. And in that truth, Eli found his own path forward. He would serve, he would protect, he would honor the sacrifice that had been made for him. Not because he had to, but because he chose to. Because it was the right thing to do, and because somewhere out there, his father would be proud. The boy who had watched his father being taken away was gone forever. In his place stood a young man ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, carrying with him the greatest gift a father could give, the knowledge that he was loved, that he was worth any sacrifice, and that sometimes the deepest love requires the greatest letting go. The sun set over the academy grounds, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Eli stood at his window, watching the light fade, and for the first time in years, he smiled. Not the broken smile of a child trying to be brave, but the confident smile of a young man who finally understood his place in the world. His father's sacrifice would not be in vain. The love that had driven Michael Harrison to give up everything would live on in his son, passed down like a sacred trust from one generation to the next. And in that continuation, in that endless cycle of love and protection and sacrifice, both father and son had found their redemption. The story of Michael Harrison was over. The story of Eli Harrison was just beginning.